Hey, this is Frank Yosa, CEO of Ketone, and this podcast is going to be a very interesting one. It's a little bit on the long side, but the data that this guy brings out is just great. So this is a pro Continental professional cyclist. So he's not on the World Tour team, but he's at the next tier underneath that. And it was an amazing story that his father kind of called me in a panic saying that his son had done so well, and he wanted to recheck the WADA certificate and the testing because he's going to be tested for blood doping, or not blood doping, for doping, and wanted to make sure because the ketones were working so well that he was worried that there might be something in there, but there wasn't. So he's going to go into how he actually picked the team that he was going to join to make sure that they were not part of the NPCC, because NPCC has a silly ban on ketones. So he actually picked his team based on that. And also, he initially thought that it was way too expensive a few years ago, but then realized that he can take much, much less, and he's only taking it for recovery, yet he's noticing drastic improvements in his multi-day stage races, just using it in recovery. So then we go into, if you wanted to try to use it during the race, a few different techniques there. So he's not even using it in a race, and he's freaking out about how well it's working for him. So we'll look at the data, we'll look at the charts, and get some tips on how he can try to tweak it. Hey, this is Frank Yosa, CEO of Ketone, and today we have Moran. He's a Continental rider, and I got this really interesting call from his father where he was kind of panicking, saying, please send me your WADA data proving that this batch was tested at WADA, because I think his results for his son, he coaches his son, his results were too good, and they were worried that there might be something contaminated in there, and it was clean. We had the report of that exact file. So, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for letting us talk about your protocol, offering some tweaks, and take it from there and look at your data.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me, though. The main thing is, which you already said, is we wanted to have some form of certificate, which I can show to the authorities in case of any doping test or whatsoever.
But why did he care? Why was he in a frantic about this one time? Whether there was, tell us what happened with your performance that made him, really want to see the WADA testing.
Yeah. So let's call it that way. I did just last week a race in Europe, Tour of the Alps, which is a 5-day stage race through the Austrian Italian Alps, and I have done very well there. I have done a lot of very well in publicity wise as well, because basically I spent 3 out of 5 days in a breakaway, racing or fighting for a intermediate points jersey, and that gained a lot of attention in Austria. Yeah, so, and we've seen this in my case over the past couple of years when I did good in some races, that next thing you know, next morning, the doping authorities are knocking on my door wanting to do the test. No issue at all with that. So that was the only reason, basically, why we want to have that certificate. I mean, I have done some doping tests over the past 6 months, also over the past 2 months, where I was actively taking Ketone, the KE4. Yeah. And basically what I did there, I just showed them, the bottles and the packaging, which states that it's free of banned substances and WADA tested. And they are completely, don't get me wrong, they were 100% fine with that. With that certificate, we just wanted to be 110%.
Yeah, sure. I think you said that you had a PR or something. I don't know how you calculate a PR on a race with a different course.
It's kind of hard to describe this. Basically because the races which I did, those 5-day stage races, it's not like a typical race where you knock out a 10-minute or a 20-minute PR. It's just, you just look at the power data over the race and your heart rate, for example. And because it's not able to pin a number on that, because that race might be like 3.5 hours long, that race might be 4.5 hours long. But what I saw for myself, the numbers I did there, but also not only the numbers like in stage 1 or stage 4, but being able to do those numbers stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, 4, and 5 consistently, no problem. That was for me the main benefit, because back in the past, I used to do like 4 5 day stage races, and I, for 100% sure, I had one complete off day, where I just cracked after 2 hours something, because it was just empty, done. I was cooked. And this was actually the first time that it did not happen. And even more interesting, it did not happen, even though it was the hardest race I've done so far in my life.
Wow.
Power-wise, stress-wise, profile-wise, the races, how they were, and also being 3 out of 5 days in a breakaway, that's just putting a lot of strain, a lot of stress on your body. And I think that, I'm always talking about I think, because I just do not definitely know anything, So I think that in being able to put out the power I did over those 5 days, that the KE4, the ketone esters, really did wonders, more or less. Because it's not about training at some point, or it is, don't get me wrong, it's a lot about training. But when you're racing 2, 3, 4, 5 days or longer, at some point your glycogen storages are just depleted. I burn between 5,000 and 6,000 calories every day just in the race itself, and then put the resting metabolic rate of 2,000 next to it, so we're already almost at 7,000 to 8,000 calories a day. It's hard to keep up with it. I'm trying my best, I really do, but it's hard to keep up. And I think here the KE4 really did wonders by, taking it straight after the race, and also just before bed.
So you did not even, let's just be clear to the audience, you did not even take the ketone ester during the race at all. It was just post-race. And also maybe we can discuss the week before the race. Maybe you took some ketone ester then. But so we'll talk about whether or not to even take it during the race, because there's pros and cons to that. But yeah, so you were only taking it post-race and before bed. And how much were you taking post-race and before bed?
Post-race, I took about 20 ml, so 10 grams.
Wow. Okay.
And I combined that with a normal meal. So that would basically I would finish. And most riders, they crave some sort of sugary after race, but I never did. So basically, I finished the race. I have literally, in the moment I've crossed the finish line, go to the sponsor, my caretaker, basically. I get my protein shake, which consists between 15 and 20 grams of protein, which is a whey protein. Then I do a small cool down. I was lucky that most of our hotels were within 10, 15 kilometers of reach after the finish line. So I did between 20 and 30 minutes of a cool down straight away, but no food there. Maybe like a small rice cake, which is approximately 25 grams of carbs. Back to the hotel. In the hotel, I took 20 ml, so 10 grams of KE4, paired with a big bowl of rice with some tuna, or luckily we were in Italy, so some prosciutto crudo or prosciutto cotto. And
that's not our recommended protocol, but hell, if something works for you, great. But let me go over what we recommend, and you can try it one day, and then, you'll just know. Hopefully, you'll know within one day whether it worked better.
Yeah.
We would suggest the ketone ester immediately at the finish line, not the protein, because the ketone ester kind of gets blocked when you have other food in your system. It slows down the absorption of it drastically, and also any blood glucose spike tends to interfere with the ketone uptake. So like people say that the body prefers ketone, sure, but it's kind of like when you're burning a fire, you prefer to have coal, a slow burning fire, but if you put twigs on it, it's going to burn the twigs first. So the ketones might not be as utilized taken with food and after the protein. So what we suggest is the ketone ester first, immediately, and then 30, 40 minutes later, getting that protein in. Some people, for workout purposes, they say just the ketone ester and then no food for 2 hours, but that has a different benefit. But for recovery, taking the ketone ester immediately afterward. So you took 20 mLs. The clinical trial data, they suggest 50 mLs post-workout and then 50 mLs before bed. I keep on thinking that that's way too high. But I talked to the researchers, and they do not think that less would work. So until the actual studies come out, we won't know. But normally I'm telling people to take less and less during the rides, but post-workout, there's not a risk of like your blood sugar dropping and messing up your race. So there's more room to take more afterward if you wanted to. Just, keep that in mind. I know it gets super expensive, so you have to balance the cost, but if you're finding benefit with your current protocol, you might want to keep it. You might want to tweak it. And before bed, you said how much you take before bed? 20 ml?
I take half a cap to a cap. So that's like
during the races. So during a multi-stage race, you'll take only half a capful to a cap, like next to nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there again, the clinical trials, they suggest 50 mLs before bed, which I think is crazy too high. If I'm ketogenic and I had just a regular workout one day, and the ketogenic part I just mentioned, because if I have a baseline of ketones and then I take some at night, it messes up my sleep. If I take even 5 mLs, one capful, it messes up my sleep. But I'm not riding for 4, 5, 6 hours at whatever, hundreds of watts. So the professional riders have gone all the way up to 50. I have heard directly from some people that super high amount can mess up their sleep. But the scientists said, hey, we had, I don't know, 10, 15 athletes, and there was not one report of people having worse sleep. And they took it for 15 days in this trial where they simulated the Tour de France. And that recovery trial, at the end of the 15-day simulated Tour de France, they then give them a time trial, and the Ketone Ester group was 15% faster in their time trial, like massively faster.
Yeah, I have read those studies, and especially which was super interesting. That's actually the study which got me into taking ketones, is that after 5 weeks, they started producing EPO by themselves.
That's a different paper. That's another paper that's more recent.
That paper got me into it.
Yeah. Well, there was a paper in 2019 that was just 15 days post-workout and before bed, 50 mLs of KE4 or 25 grams of active. So ours is 50%. So I'm doing the math already. So the equivalent of almost a full bottle of KE4. So 50 out of the 60 mLs immediately after the race, the simulated race, and then 50 mLs before bed for, I think it was 10 to 15 days. I don't know exactly how many days, every day. But what we're finding that much less works. I have one theory that nighttime, maybe if I take 5 mLs or 10 mLs, it ruins my sleep. It doesn't ruin my sleep if I go to bed at 2 or 3 a.m. because I've been up all, getting ready to go on a flight or doing some cramming. Then I can take more and then wake up, super fresh. But maybe there's something where if you take a huge amount, maybe the energy somehow spikes in your system and makes you crash. And maybe it does. Maybe this hyper huge amount makes you fall asleep more because it's too much energy. Because we've had some, elderly ladies that have taken 10 mLs and they said, oh, this doesn't work, and made me fall asleep after an hour. It's like, oh, no, that means you took too much. You can cut that back to 5. So maybe there's something with these mega doses. But it's great to hear that you took 20 mLs post-workout, 2.5 to 5 mLs of KE4 before bed, and you saw some great data. Can you also, I wanted to ask you, you're on the Continental team. Are you part of the MPCC?
No, I'm not.
And why is that?
Well, first of all, after the end of last year, or I haven't been part of the MPC, or my teams haven't been part of the MPC over the past 4 years. But first and foremost, I was just on the look of a new team. I've been riding for the same team the past 3 years. No bad feelings, nothing at all. I just wanted some new surroundings, new team, new members, new friends, new guys, whatsoever. And obviously, being myself into sports and exercise science studies, I have heard of ketones way before than yesterday. I first started hearing in 2019 during the Tour de France. So I've been looking into them. The reason why I haven't started taking them earlier was just a cost factor, which has dropped over the past few years, and now it's actually doable for me. And also because 2018 and 2019, I was riding for a team which was part of the MPCC.
Mhm.
And being a team which is part of MPCC, basically just an organization, you could say, which ensures that the teams who are members of that organization have stricter anti-doping regulations than other teams do. That comes with more regular tests, stricter protocols when it comes to medicine or doctor certificates, but also the MPCC has banned their teams within the organization from taking ketones. Because obviously, you know, when ketones first came out, it was just a huge fuss. Is this legal? And to be fair, the first place I was like, fuck ketones. We're not doing that. Sorry for swearing.
Yeah.
I was like, this should be banned and everything. But reading more and more about it, it's like, in my opinion, if you are bound to ban ketones, you might as well just also ban glucose, you know, or sugar or caffeine, you know, because it is just energy, you know. It's not something. And also the next thing is like, it's not something like performance enhancing as EPO or testosterone, for example, you know, because basically in the end it comes down who trains the most and who recovers the best. And ketones is just an excessive thing you can add to it, just as more glucose during training, which makes you recover faster for the next session, you know. So as I said, in my opinion, if you're bound to ban ketones, might as well also ban glucose or sugar or carbs, whatever they call them, or even caffeine.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And the MPCC, their stance is that the reason that they ban it is that it doesn't work and that it's really expensive. And that's just a silly, you know, if it doesn't work and it's really expensive, why do you care? And you mentioned that the price had come down. The price has actually been pretty much the same for the last few years. The difference is the protocols. People just assume that you had to take this huge $30 at a time. Actually, it would be $50 worth per day if you followed the clinical trial tiles. But you're taking $10, actually maybe even $9 per day on race day, which means, you know, you might take less during your training sessions just to kind of get more in your system.
And that's also maybe interesting to highlight the difference for me in training period, basically, or racing period, because we talked about, you know, my post racing nutrition strategy and also ketone protocol. I have chosen that protocol specifically because I was just afraid, you know, during such a hard race to get depleted. So I stuck to basically a protocol when it comes to nutrition, which I knew, and added a small amount of ketones to it, just to be on the safe side, to not completely go nuts and completely run out.
Well, yeah, so you want to test. Yeah, you want to test in your workouts, hard workouts, you know, well before you take it into a multi-day stage race. You know, this protocol of taking the ketone ester before and see how it works for you. But yeah, you took a low risk approach, which is, I have my perfect protocol. I'm just going to add something. And then this, you know, the tiny amount, you know, was much lower amount was helpful. Did you do any loading up on the ketone ester for the week before the big race?
I would not basically say that I upped my ketone intake. I just lowered my energy deficit throughout the week before the race. So I just reduced my training intensity and training volume, therefore less need of energy, excessive energy, but kept the same ketone and nutrition protocol.
So you took, what did you take? The same 20 mLs after your workouts leading up to it?
Yes. Okay. And it varies a little bit for me because leading up to it, I had a period of like 6 weeks or 4 weeks of proper training with only one race in it. And my protocols during those 4 weeks were like, I would wake up 7:30 in the morning. Have normal breakfast, which would contain, varies from day to day, between white rice with an omelette or some oatmeal with an omelette. Then I would go out at 9:30, 10 o'clock for a longer training day, which 6 hours with an energy expenditure of around 5 to 6,000 kilojoules or kilocalories over those 5 or 6, 7 hours. Yeah. Then I would come back and then I would actually do it just as you recommended it in your protocol. Have my ketones, my 20 mLs, have a shower and everything, get my bike cleaned, have a shower, and 20, 30 minutes after I took the ketones, I would have like literally a vegetable-based, protein-based meal. So basically low carb, which would consist basically between omelets, tuna, or some lentils or stuff like that with some vegetables, but no carbs. And then wait until dinner, have a normal dinner, plain white rice with some protein next to it, some vegetables, and that's it. And that dinner would be 3 hours prior before I would go to sleep, so that my blood sugar completely levels out before going to sleep. And then just right before I hit that switch on my light, I took another half a cup to a cup of ketones.
Okay.
So during training period, I would also go not on a ketogenic diet, because during training I would load up like 120 to 150 grams of carbs an hour just to sustain the power during the training. But afterwards, yes, I would keep it on a keto diet, you could say. And so yeah, basically ingested some ketones to it to not lose power.
So let me get this straight. I had a question about you sometimes work out twice a day?
Yes.
And how many hours gap between the two workouts?
If I do it twice a day, I go like finish my morning session around 3 o'clock, something like that, 3 p.m.
Okay.
Sometimes 4 p.m. Yeah. And then there's, depending on how long the morning session was, between 2, sometimes up to 6 hours between the sessions when it's a shorter session in the morning.
Okay.
But also then I take my ketones right after the morning session.
So that's what I want to ask you about. So yeah. I was debating one researcher about whether the recovery could help people that perform twice in one day. And he thought that definitely. It needed to be the next day. And I disagree. I think that if maybe not the 2 hours, I don't know, but the 4 to 6 hours in between.
But it's a very rare occasion, 2 hours. Yeah, that's very rare.
The 2 hours. So it's more like 4 to 6 hours. So
more to 4 to 5, 6 hours.
Have you noticed a big difference taking it for recovery after the first workout? Have you noticed your second workout being better or different? And how did that feel?
Yes, definitely. Because normally, I go for a longer, intense ride in the morning, and therefore my legs are already pretty done for the next session, which is like 3, 4, 5 hours afterwards. But then I take the ketones, some protein, have a nap in between, like a 30, 40-minute nap. And somehow I'm not fresh. Don't get me wrong. I'm not fresh. But usually what I found before taking ketones, I also worked a lot with the Super Cyclist glucose monitor. And before taking the ketones, I always had that. I started the second session, and within 15 to 20 minutes, I had a massive glucose drop, which completely correlated with my feeling, because second session of the day always was a bit like I start 15 to 20 minutes in the session, I was just bonking, or not bonking, but just massive sugar crash. And thanks to the UCI banning continuous glucose monitors in cycling, I am no longer allowed to have a continuous glucose monitor, which is a shame, because I really wanted to see the data on, when taking ketones. Right. So with what happened then is I still went for my normal morning session, took my ketones, had my lunch, had a nap, went for my second session, and I did not have that drop, So I felt not energized, but I did not feel depleted.
Yeah, I don't have a comment as to the blood glucose dropping, but we have seen weightlifters that say, hey, if I work out twice a day, and if I don't have the ketone ester, I'm just wiped out for that second workout. Like my central nervous system just isn't recovered. And they actually said that they just can't work out twice a day unless they have the ketones after the first workout. And that's one day. But they said that when they do the second workout, it almost feels as if they hadn't worked out that morning. Like maybe they had worked out yesterday. And there's one athlete who's a pentathlon, like a decathlon, multiple events, track races, even though those are sprints. I'm trying to tell them, like, take it after your first event of a multi-event day, and the researcher disagreed with me, but we'll see. Time will tell. It takes 2 to 3 years to answer any of these questions on a scientific
Definitely.
basis, but it should be very, very evident and very noticeable, just that recovery between morning and nighttime. So I'm glad that you've confirmed something that I've been saying for a couple of years.
And I'm definitely also trying to confirm that with the continuous glucose monitor, because it is only banned in racing for me.
Right.
But I have now, for the first time in quite a long time, actually 2.5 weeks without racing coming up. So coming Sunday, I have a race, and then I have 2.5 weeks no racing. So I'm gonna attach a glucose monitor on me, and also gonna check it on how it would work out on the second session with my glucose, because I just feel that I don't have that massive sugar drop anymore in the second session, and therefore minimizing the strain it puts on my body, and therefore having a better recover, and therefore being better the next day.
Right. And then when it comes, you do that several days in a row, then when it comes to race day, lo and behold, you're more powerful, more strong, more recovered, and you have these 5 days of breaking out that you weren't expecting. Can you show me some of the data and charts that you had that kind of showed the months that you used no ketone ester, and then when you switched to ketone ester, I think you showed some load differences? Let me give you the screen.
I want to share the screen, but it tells me that only you can share screens.
Yeah, I did. I just gave you a share screen.
Should be perfect. Bertram. So you should be able to see my screen right now.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So what this graph is basically stating is the basically underlining the most important factor for me, which I saw in taking ketones. It is, well, sorry, it's in German. Sorry for that, but this is resting heart rate. Yeah.
Resting heart rate. Okay.
And you see over the period, this is 1 year, from last year, 30th of April until today. And you literally see here, I was a bit sick, nothing special to that. But you see a constant drop in resting heart rate,
Wow.
And resting heart rate has often been taken as one of many parameters when it comes to recovery, or a measurement of recovery, And I literally started taking ketones around here, August, September 22.
Okay.
And you see from here on, it just keeps going down. There are some irregulatories, when I was a bit sick or something. Here, there's nothing, because I switched from a sponsor and I didn't have my Garmin watch anymore. But back here, I had it back on again, and you see that it just keeps getting lower and lower and lower. And that is, for me, the biggest index for me to see if the ketones are working or not. Because in my protocol, I primarily use it as a recovery measurement and not as a performance measurement.
Now, did you notice a difference in your resting heart rate on days that you forgot to take the ketone ester the night before? Like you would see a daily pop back up?
Yes and no. Sorry, I was too fast. Yes and no. I did not see any difference like when I took it 10 days prior to that consistently. Then 1 or 2 days missing it, I did not see any difference. But I did see a difference when, for example, I ran out of ketones, forgot to order somehow, and I couldn't take it for like 7, 8, 9 days, And then I saw a small rise in my resting heart rate again.
And the reason I ask is I was wondering whether the taking the ketone ester immediately before bed might somehow artificially make the number look lower. So like your heart isn't necessarily more efficient. It just had ketones in it. So it's acutely more efficient. But then you said, and that would be on a day-to-day basis. Like you miss it one day, you'd see it pop back up. But what you said is you had to not take it for a few days to see it start creeping back up. And that would be a better sign. That would be a better sign than if one day you didn't take it and it goes straight back up. That would maybe mean that the ketones were kind of artificially making it look that morning lower than reality. But
I get where you're coming from,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. But I counter-checked it with my objective feeling in the morning. I woke up, felt my legs, walked down the stairs,
Right.
went for a walk with the dog, and I immediately felt, or not immediately, but I do feel a difference in resting heart rate if it's like a little bit higher than usually
Okay.
or not.
Great. Yeah.
So I do that feel also objectively if I have slept well or not. And I definitely feel the days where I mentioned, when I forgot to order something that had like 6, 7, 8 days no ketones, I definitely felt the next day not more tired, just not as ready, you could say,
Yeah.
as I did feel when I did take the ketones.
Okay. And another thing you could try is you can take some first thing in the morning. And we don't really talk about that too much, but just getting it in your system, even if you're having breakfast, preferably an hour later, but even if you're having breakfast a half an hour later, it's not going to hurt you. And it could, just do another round. You're taking it immediately after your ride, first thing in the morning. If you, you're taking it immediately after your ride, right before bed, taking it first thing in the morning. If your ride's not for 3 or 4 hours, why not? It can't hurt you. As far as how much to take, then it becomes a function of cost, because you could take 5, you could take 10, 15 if money was no object, but just even getting in that little 5, I think would be beneficial. So you're going to show us the data of your 5 days of racing and your output.
Yeah.
And are you able to compare this to like the same race the year before as far as day-to-day output going down?
That's the problem. Not really, because this is the first time I have done this race, but I can compare it to other races. I have not done this specific race the year prior, but I've done over the past 5 years, like, 50 multiple stage races.
Okay.
So I can compare definitely to others. So I'm going to pop up the first stage. You see here a couple of numbers, 10 minutes at 4:30, for example. And those are not high numbers. For me, also not. So don't get me wrong. It's not super high. But when I go to the whole workout, quick disclaimer, it was a short stage, only 130 kilometers. I went into the breakaway right away after 5Ks. And after that, I was just basically until 20K to go, all time in breakaway, fighting for the intermediate sprint points and everything to get that jersey at the end of the day, which I did succeed in. So the most interesting here is, for me, if you look at this, is the energy expenditure, which is roughly 4,000 kilojoules. Well, normally in training, when I did like 4,000 kilojoules, I would take a day off the next day or an easy day the next day, But in me taking that intermediate sprint jersey, I had to go the next day, again, full gas into attack mode, basically, you could say. So then I go to stage 2. And also after stage 1, I did those, 20 mLs with normal food and everything, and 2.5 to 5 mLs just before bed. Then the second stage is already some better numbers here, 5 minutes at 4:77. And that's the interesting part for me, because usually I would expect after a day in a breakaway, like on first day, to be depleted the next day. Just not feeling ready enough, just there's no energy left. Maybe for the first hour, but that's it, done. But that's the fun thing about this race. If I go to the first hour of the race, quick disclaimer, it was like that. We had slightly uphill start. I just went straight from the gun. I had one another rider from Education First. We were together, the two of us, and we rode for almost an hour in front of the peloton, and the peloton just did not let us go. They just did not want to have us on the front, which was very strenuous and very intense hour, to be fair. But we managed to stay in front, and eventually, after 45 to 60 minutes of fighting, they let us go. So lucky for us, we were again in the breakaway. But normally, if you look at this, it was 1 hour, the first hour of the race. I did normalized at 394 watts. So for people who don't know what normalized power or the difference between average and normalized power is, average power is literally everything. So you take the hour at every single point where your pedal stroke is 0. So where it's like, for example, a corner or a downhill, it also takes those 0 moments of 0 power into the average power. Normalized power doesn't. Normalized power cuts off or caps off the maximum and the lowest of your power you did after that 1 hour. So basically it involves no sprints, but also no downhills, you could say. So the normalized power is basically the actual power you would need to put out if you're doing a individual time trial solo with the same speed. And I did 1 hour at almost 400 watts after being completely depleted from the first day. I would definitely not have expected such numbers, if I'm honest. I would have expected to be way lower, but that just shows that my energy storages were completely full from the previous day. I had no issues with recovery whatsoever. And I think that ketones played a very big role in that, because I just recovered faster. I had a better night's sleep, a better rest, and therefore was way more ready the next day.
Nice.
So this was the second day, and also here I took both intermediate sprints. Again, had the intermediate sprints jersey. Then we go back. The third and fourth day are not quite eventful. I did not get into the breakaway then, but getting into breakaway is more luck. It's more luck or bad luck than it is to have to do with actual power. So those 2 days I was just not lucky enough to get into breakaway. But the last day, I was lucky enough again to get into breakaway. After, you can see it's the gray background here is actually the start, the start, the altitude we're at. And you can see we started here, and it went straight 1,000 meters of climbing all the way up to 2,000 meters from the start, from the gun. It was a very unpleasant moment of the race, to be fair. But if we take the best 30 minutes, where it here, this was basically the entire climb. Again, at normalized almost 400 watts. And I managed, this was the 5th stage. So normally you would think 5th stage, you already have 4 stages done, that you would completely deplete it. So that there's no way that you burn every day 5,000 to 8,000 calories. And on the 5th day, you're having good legs again. That's just, it's not normal. And I took the protocol as we spoke about it. And you see on the 5th day, I did 394 or 387 average over half an hour, and could stay easily with the front group. So, and we're talking front group. In that front group, there were Tour de France winners, Giro d'Italia winners. Everything was there. World champion. Everything was there. So, and there was only a group of 35 riders left, and I was there as well, which was actually quite cool to look around and see those guys riding next to you.
One thing that the ketones do is it actually helps build mitochondria. So the mitochondria gets used more in the slow twitch muscles for that hills. So that's where ketones might excel more on hills. And it also excels more on altitude. Now, the mitochondria is something you build over time. The altitude, you don't have any ketones in your system because you're not racing with the ketones yet. So I don't know if the altitude would be more beneficial. But yeah, so this is some great data, and very interesting to see this.
And the cool thing is also, after this, we went into the downhill, and somewhere over here, the breakaway was established. I was again part of it, and therefore fought again for the intermediate jersey, which I did succeed in and got it in the end. But that's not a real interesting thing, because the most interesting thing was about this week is I had 5-day stage race. It wasn't the hardest stage race I've ever done in my life. I was completely depleted. I was done. But luckily, my team did on Sunday another race, which I had to start, unfortunately. It was nothing special. It was an Austrian National Cup race, so nothing special. But I just went straight from the gun. No people were taking captives, nothing. I just straight from the gun because I was just bored and I did not really want to start in that race, to be honest. But yeah, I spent 4 hours straight from the gun in a breakaway. And I did with normalized 4 hours at 350 watts.
And that's how many days after the race? That was 2 days later?
That was 1 day after the race.
1 day, just like the next day, or one day break?
The races were Monday to Friday. Saturday I had off. I did like 1.5 hours easy, and then Sunday I had to race. But I kept the same protocol on Saturday, which was the day off. And normally I would expect on Sunday that I'm still, completely toast.
Right.
But nothing whatsoever. Power-wise, it was probably my best race ever.
And was that the race that your father called me up to find the WADA? He's like, "What's going on here?" It's a good call for me to get something like that they think it's so good that it's got to be banned. But what it's doing is actually healthy. It's actually helping you recover and making you more healthy. It's not taxing you. It's actually lowering your heart rate, making your heart rate more efficient. It's not a stimulant like caffeine. So let's talk about potential opportunities for things to try during the race. Now that we have your attention with the recovery, and that is the easiest protocol. The during race protocol, we just don't know. There's one clinical trial that shows a 2% performance gain, but they also did it fasted. And then when other clinical trials tried to recreate that, they did not do fasted. They did it with a meal, and then it suddenly didn't work. A lot of the clinical trials are not showing performance during the ride, but I'd like to say they didn't show performance during the ride with that exact protocol. And that's all they're showing. And there can be 1 million different protocols. So you have to really find what works for you. I mean, there's some riders who are hyper intakers. They can take 5, 7 bottles per day of ketone ester. So we don't know what's going on with them. If they're on a different fuel system, whether they're just burning fat and they're not burning any glucose, like, I don't know. But for the most part, that'd be way, way, way too much. But what we're seeing in riders, when they take it during the ride, they say that their peak performance, they feel flat. That's the feedback. They always say it. I even say it sometimes before. I said, let me guess, you felt flat. And they're like, how'd you know? I was like, yeah, because I hear it 20 times. So the flat feeling is, I think, them taking too much. So ketones will lower your blood sugar, and they're just taking, too much ketones because they think if 10 mLs works, then 20 mLs must work. So do you ever do fasted workouts?
I gotta say, in training period, I usually start my day, doesn't matter what training day it is, even if it's like an 8-hour ride, I don't care. I usually start with, I wake up, 30 minutes, easy fasted jogging.
Okay.
That's so usually every day, almost half an hour only.
Okay. Well, that I'm not sure that would count, because I'm looking more for like a 1 to 2 hour intense, workout.
I do in training periods sometimes, but nothing intense.
Okay. Well, when I say intense, I don't necessarily mean sprinting, but you might try small amounts of ketone ester for those fasted workouts.
And what I really wanted to try, because obviously, before starting taking ketones, I've looked in a lot into of your videos and suggestions you made on your website, and I found that one interesting video for me, which really was interesting, because me being a cyclist, obviously, being not addicted, but being overly obsessive with my weight, because at the end of the day, it's watts per kilogram in cycling. And I found that very interesting video of yours where you were talking about, even you had some responses from athletes that did like a normal endurance ride, like let's say 4 hours, and they were, instead of taking a banana and some glucose during the ride, which is normal, they were taking like every hour a certain amount of ketones, without having any problems whatsoever. With obviously their power was lower, because you have to adapt a little bit, but there were no signs of depletion or feeling flat or going into
their watts weren't lower. Their watts weren't lower. That's the difference. It was actually even. So what they were used to is a fasted workout, and the goal is to burn fat, to help lose weight. And little side note, we don't sell this as a weight loss supplement.
No, definitely. I also don't use it for that.
But in training, perhaps if you're normally going to eat, I don't know, 400, 500, 1,000 calories during a 3 to 4 hour training run, but then now you're only having 50, 60 calories of ketone ester. Yeah, it's just going to be, the math is going to be fewer calories and you're burning more. Yeah. That will help for weight loss in respect of a professional athlete. So these people would do these fasted workouts, and the benefit for the fasted workouts is it would help them burn fat. They would not be nearly as sore the next day, but their watts were always like 10%, maybe more watts lower, but they were fine with that because they were, there's a different benefit at the end of the tunnel. With this, they were adding the ketone ester to that deficit, and they were just getting back to baseline. They were getting their workouts back to what they would normally have with glucose. And they're like, wait a second, now we still have the benefit of not being sore the next day. So it was just allows you to do more difficult workouts, and with the fat burning or fat loss benefit of, of the fasted ride. So so if you want to incorporate, trying to incorporate some fasted rides and seeing if you can maintain the same output that you would normally do in those workouts. And that would be just 10 mLs up front, no breakfast. So no breakfast. That's a really hard thing for everyone. They want to do everything.
Could you still do, for example, sorry for interrupting, but could you still do, because I'm overly obsessive with my body itself, and muscle breakdown is just a very real thing. Could you still just do a no carb or 0 to no carb breakfast, just containing of an omelet, like let's say a 3-4 egg omelet, and would that still count as fasted? Or
no, I don't think so. I mean, you can try it again. It's a 3-year answer. But if we're trying to trigger your own endogenous fat burning, it's not going to do it with a breakfast. I don't care what. Even if fat, even if you just had a fat bomb, that stops endogenous production. So people like to drink fat bombs or fat coffee in the morning, and they say that it extends their fast, but it doesn't really create endogenous production. So fat will stop endogenous production. So the only thing that doesn't stop endogenous production is just no food. So if you can have, instead of a buttered coffee in the morning, you can just have regular coffee and skip breakfast. The no fat is going to make you burn more fat. So if the goal is for the workout to burn your own endogenous production or make your own endogenous production, I don't know that there's going to be much difference with a fat breakfast. Try it different ways, but you try it without breakfast, and 10 mLs every hour. Now someone might say, hey, your ketone ester is also going to stop endogenous production. So hypertechnically, yes, perhaps, but much more, it's not going to do it it's not going to stop endogenous production nearly as much as you having a breakfast. So the idea is you're taking this tiny amount of calories, and I'm trying to get another coach on the podcast. He had maybe 5 athletes that they did 5 days of training, and they did it all fasted, 10 mLs, per hour. Actually, he increased it to 20 mLs the last 2 hours, but I don't know that that's necessary because too much could stop endogenous. But he said that their watts were the same as their glucose days, and they did this for 5 days in a row. He's like, he looks at the bottle and he sees the calories. He's like, 12 calories per capful. How is this mathematically possible? Said, well, the only way it's possible is that it's triggering endogenous production, or it's not triggering endogenous. It just allows your body to do what it would have done naturally, which is create its own ketones, but they're not able to make enough. That's the difference. So people say, oh, well, why not just stick to fasted? Your body makes ketones. Yeah, but it's not making enough. So you add a little bit of ketones, and it's just really amplifying what's in there, getting them back to baseline. And before you know it, they're just not sore the next day. Now, we talked about recovery in that 4-hour period. one of the things that Dr. Dog has seen, if you saw that podcast where he talks about recovery during the ride, and that he has his riders after 1 hour of riding, he has them do a 10-minute explosion, 5-minute, and then 2 minutes. And then 2 hours later, the 10-5-2 again. And it's that second 10-5-2 that they feel like they didn't have the first 10-5-2 explosion. So it was as if they're, just the recovery during the ride for later on in the race. So his ratio is more like 3 parts glucose, 1 part ketones. Now, this is different than fasted rides. We're kind of jumping around a little bit. The fasted rides is really, pushing endogenous. His system, I don't think pushes endogenous. It's just adding a little bit of ketones. During the first, I don't know exactly when he does it. I'd have to go back and look whether it's before the first ride, but he's doing much less, and it's about recovering during the ride and being ready. I wouldn't necessarily recommend. It's way too early to recommend an actual race be just on ketones. I think it's possible one day, which is, people can laugh at that. I think it's possible one day to kind of figure out, do you use a slow carbohydrate and ketones? Is there a way to stay keto? But if you did that, you'd have to change your race strategy as well. Like you're saying that you were leading for an hour or two, and then the rest of the peloton finally gave up. You'd be doing more of that stuff where you're not doing full out 2-minute sprints. You'd be doing this sustained effort that they're like, oh, well, he can't sustain that. We'll catch up to him shortly. But no, you can maintain that sustained effort, but then your peak performance won't be as good. You need more glucose for that. So your race strategy would change. So if you change your fuel, you've got to change your race strategy.
Oh, definitely.
So you could try 10 mLs, before your ride, and keep all the other food, breakfast on race day. You could try 10 mLs. You could slow release some of the KE1, which is our better tasting drink. It's not nearly as powerful even on a gram per gram basis, but it tastes much better. So if you're putting it into a large water bottle, it tastes yummy. It tastes like peach. And whether there's
but I also gotta say,
not,
after a while, I have like 0 problems at all
with the KE4.
KE4.
But when you dilute KE4, have you ever tried it in a big water bottle? It's just nasty. One thing is taking a shot, you get used to it, but diluting it in a big water bottle, it's kind of nasty.
Keeps nasty.
So the KE1, you can dilute it, and you're just going to get yourself another, a full bottle of this. We call that 2 servings. You would, adding a full bottle every hour or 2 into your water bottle, I don't think it's going to hurt, and you might find some benefits. So you'd want to play around with that in your workouts. So workouts, you want to play with doing some fasted workouts, just ketone ester, KE4. You could be 5 mLs up front, 5 mLs per hour, maybe 10 mLs up front, 10 mLs per hour. This team went up to 20 mLs, but I kind of not sure that that's necessary. If their first 3 hours they're burning fat, and that ketones is just basically keeping you from being hungry, so the mental distraction of being hungry is actually a big part of it. Why go up to another 20? Because you don't need more. If your body's burning fat,
you're doing everything right.
Yeah, it's more like the ketones aren't a calorie. It's not an energy source. It's a keeping you from being distracted mentally, because that's super important. Food. You're not thinking about that. It's keeping your brain sharp, and your body's making its own endogenous. I don't know if you need to go up in the last 2 hours, but try different ways. With your continuous glucose monitor, I would want to see if you did 10, 10, 10, and then 20, 20, whether the 20, 20 makes your blood sugar drop too much. You got to watch out for that, because excess ketones. And then we have the snake water drink. Have you ever seen that or played with that at all?
Nothing else so far. I've stuck to KE4.
All right. So this is similar to the KE1. It's a blend of ketone ester, ketone salt, and ketone free acid. So it tastes much better. So it's 3 ketones.
Okay.
They're not as powerful on a gram per gram basis as the ketone ester, but then this one also has 10 to 15 other nootropics and other branched chain amino acids, some brain nootropics, and something called dynamine and T-cream that are not caffeine stimulants, which we can talk about caffeine in a second, but they are will help with mental sharpness. So you could do that throughout. You could do that at the end. Oh, but it also has, I forgot to say, it has isomaltulose. So it has a super slow, low glycemic index carbohydrate. And the idea there is to keep your blood sugar from dipping too low. So if I do a workout, I'm just doing a Orange Theory 1 hour workout. It's high intensity, some sprints. If I take KE1, I notice myself a little bit dizzy, just low blood sugar, because I'm also ketogenic naturally, and I'm doing sprints. Not a good combination. But when I take the snake water, just a little bit of these carbohydrates, I can't think of a time that I was dizzy.
Really?
I don't get the lightheadedness. But if you were to buy this product, the isomaltulose by itself, the slow carbohydrate, they call one serving 30 grams.
Yeah.
But all I put in this is 3 grams per serving. And the idea is it's not a calorie again. It's just to keep your blood sugar from dropping too much and giving you a little bit of a floor so that it won't drop your blood sugar. Now, that has not been proven in science. That this is all, theoretical, talking to a pharmacist that is, hyper sensitive to every ingredient, what it does. And we formulated that.
Yeah.
So that's more fun, but not many professional athletes will try it because all the science is under KE4. But I do have professional athletes that when they go down the product line, okay, the KE4 worked, and then they try the snake water, they don't go back. they like it. They like it
Really?
because it has all these other things in it. But it hasn't been proven in science. And some people say, oh, maybe it's a placebo. Great. I don't care if you get a performance record.
If it works, it works.
Whatever. And some people might keep this towards the last couple hours of the ride because of the brain sharpness, which ketones help anyhow. But you might not need, caffeine at the beginning. This is not caffeine, but it's similar. You won't need caffeine in the first 2 hours of a race, whereas you might want caffeine in the last 2 hours of the race when your brain is more faltering. So the snake water has more of those, brain nootropics that might be exponentially better towards the end of the race. Now, I didn't ask you about caffeine. What do you do with caffeine in all of your, working out and races?
Yeah, so naturally, I don't drink caffeine on a daily basis. So no coffee, no Coke, nothing for me. I do find, though, in racing or in super intense efforts during training, I need to take starting at 100 milligrams of caffeine just half an hour before I start the intense workout. So in a race case, it would be like half an hour to 40 minutes prior to start. I take 100 milligrams of caffeine.
Okay.
Most of the time, that's in the form of a double espresso.
That's during your race? You take a double espresso?
Half an hour prior to the race.
Okay. So you might try in your workouts, if you're doing something intense like that, to see if the ketone ester instead will give you that mental focus instead of the caffeine. Or you can cut the caffeine in half with ketone ester. So ketone ester will increase the delivery of the caffeine. So you have to watch out.
How much would that be the ratio?
Well, so if you stick with the 100 and then you add 10 mLs or 50 mLs, whatever, if you add any ketone ester, it might make that 100 feel like 200. And there's a reason you didn't take 200, because the 200 for whatever reason makes you jittery. So you could either try going to 0 and see if the ketone ester does, a similar effect, or cut it in half and add it with the ketone ester. The difference between the ester and the caffeine is a stimulant. What goes up must come down and make you crash. Now, if you time it right and you're coming down after your race, then it's not as important, right? But if you're still in the race and that caffeine wears off, it can take a toll and make you go down. And caffeine isn't really a real energy source. It's a perception of energy. So it blocks your sense of being tired. But then once that wears out, your tiredness is going to come back, with a vengeance. But the ketone ester shouldn't do that. The ketone ester isn't a stimulant. It fuels the brain up to 100%, because after you get tired, your brain stops uptaking glucose. It just says, hey, that's enough glucose, and your brain starts to get brain fog. Ketones bypass that and fill the brain to 100%, not to 110 like caffeine. Just fills it it just tops it off. So one example is mice. They give mice a traumatic brain injury, and traumatic brain injury, like a football player, it blocks the glucose ability to reach the brain. So they gave the mice ketone ester, and it bypassed that blockage. And the group without the ketone ester couldn't walk the maze, but the group with the ketone ester was able to walk the maze at the same speed as their baseline before the injury.
Yeah.
And I said to the scientist, well, they must have been like 10% slower or 20%. He's like, what part of baseline don't you understand? Like, it just refueled the brain and the brain was back to 100. Doesn't mean that they were healed. Let's not get, confused with. But the brain was having the fuel source. So you could play around with ketones, instead of caffeine there, or half the caffeine. You can also try playing with ketones right before mountain climbs.
Yeah.
Anywhere from a quick 10 ml shot all the way up to 25, 30. You don't want to take too much.
No, definitely. Yeah.
But just that small 10 to 30, and see if you just magically, your legs just feel like they're there. Also keep in mind your cadence. You're going to be better at the slower cadence, slower pedaling than faster pedaling, because there's more mitochondria in the slow twitch muscles. So something to keep in mind, if you're not sure what pedal speed to go for, you go for the slower one. So right before a climb, and then altitude and climb oftentimes are interchangeable, but we think that at altitude you have much more, your heart beats much better with ketones. And we have a clinical trial that hasn't been published yet, but they're showing, as the altitude went up, the heart was, not able to pump as much, but with the ketone ester, that entire spectrum just moved, meaning that it was as if they were 5% lower, as they were climbing, and they go to 1,000 and then they go to 2,000. It was, when they're at 2,000, it was as if they were still at 1,000, like if that makes sense. So the ketones do help there. And then, you might be able to try this recovery during the ride, where you have your 3 different spurts, and then you're just taking anywhere from 10 to 30 mLs afterward, for the sole purpose of being more recovered when you're ready. You're ready to attack again in 2 hours. Now, what happens if they start to attack during those 2 hours and your blood sugar is low and your ketones are high, and you wanted to recover? I don't know. It might be worse off. Like they go off and you feel like you don't have your top speed, but you have this really strong base speed.
Yeah.
Maybe you get lost. I don't know. Another thing that we've found with the ketones is lower heart rate during the ride.
I've seen it as well. Yeah.
Right. So lower heart rate during the ride is a very interesting phenomenon, which is why, I hesitate saying, is there going to be a day that people can find a way to just use ketones? If your heart rate is lower, that means that you're at the threshold where you're using, fat burning versus glucose burning. If your heart rate's lower and you're staying in the fat burning, but then you can, let's say it's 10% lower, your heart rate.
Yeah.
If you can go 5% higher in watts and still stay in fat burning and stay there, I mean, that changes everything. Who cares about your massive sprints if you're able to sustain 5 to 7% in the fat burning zone? That changes everything. But glucose and ketones actually shows the heart rate going up. So when I mentioned this concept to the people who've done clinical trials, they say no, all of our data has shown the heart rate has gone up. And I said the huge difference there was it was huge sugar and huge ketones. Yeah, you had excess energy. It became a stimulant. But when people are doing these micro doses, much smaller amounts, they're seeing a lower heart rate. And unlike caffeine will do a artificial bump of your heart rate, but it doesn't necessarily change your zones. Like I didn't know that until a doctor corrected me. He said, it raises your heart rate, but it doesn't necessarily change your threshold. So they've tested it with mouth breathing, what percentage fat, what percentage glucose. But with ketones, we have one piece of data from, I think it was Greenland, where they compared a fasted workout versus a fasted workout with a little bit of ketones, and the heart rate went down, and they were able to show that they were burning more fat. So in theory, if there's a way to keep your heart rate lower per watt, definitely. So keeping at your 400 watts, but you're 7 beats per minute lower, guess what? Like you could go back up to that, 4 or 5%, or no, 2 or 3% faster watts and still be under threshold, not deplete your glycogen and just sit there steady. But that's something that's going to take, years of figuring out, because every athlete already takes 5 years to figure out what glucose and apple size and power bar, like it takes a long time. So to try to figure out a strategy where you really utilize the heart rate position. So tell me the data that you found in your heart rate data during the rides, either rides with ketones or rides where you took ketones as a recovery beforehand. What have you been seeing, during ride?
Yeah, well, it's hard to put, to give it an exact number. So I cannot say it was 6 BPM lower, same watts. I just simply cannot say that. But I have definitely seen in periods where I've been using ketones compared to periods where I've not been using ketones, I can see and feel really a difference, especially in the endurance. So not so much when I'm doing my hard efforts when it comes to heart rate. You also see there a bit lower, but not massively. The biggest benefit you see, what they call in sports and exercise science, they call the fat max, the point of fat max.
Yeah.
So there you see the biggest change of heart rate. So where I'm usually, for example, would ride at like 155 to 160 heart rate, I can see at the same watts doing the same workout, 145 heart rate.
And that's interesting, because that's not even acutely having ketones in your system during that ride.
That's only as a recovery measurement.
Right. So I wonder, when you do this testing now, during your workouts, whether you'll see another drop or whether you've already exhausted all of the drop by having it in the recovery. I don't know. So we don't know if it's a long-term having it in your system benefit, or if it's an acute, hey, the heart loves ketones. So in the case of a heart attack, they found papers 5 years ago where the body would suck up ketones from the toes to take it to the heart, because the heart prefers ketones. So if you're able to see the data, take ketones during your ride or before the ride, not too much, and you see your heart rate lower, and then you can, raise your heart rate back up and just sustain a couple percentage higher in watts and feel the same, then you have to question, why am I taking glucose again?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, but it's also that currently we are looking into purchasing a metabolic testing device from Pnoe Analytics, and as soon as we've got that, I am definitely going to do simple RAM tests. We do RAM tests every once in a while. We do like a protocol, which is 10 minutes REMs with an increment of 30 watts. So every 10 minutes, it's 30 watts more until exhaustion, basically.
Oh, yeah. That's how you test ketones. That's how you test the ketones.
Yeah.
All the current tests they give huge ketones, huge glucose. They have them ride for an hour or two. And then sometimes they wait for the ketones to go to zero. And then they have them do a 20-minute time trial. And it's like, that's a glucose-based test. That's not, but what you're talking about is, keeping increasing and seeing when you bonk. I would love to see that data, because then we can try to,
definitely.
If we get that N of 1 data from you, then we can kind of try to get a clinical trial to recreate that.
Because I'm definitely going to do those tests, and like over the course, because I just cannot, in the racing regime I'm living in, I cannot do like 6 days in a row, 6 tests, because it would compromise my training schedule. But I would do over the course of, let's say, 4 or 5 weeks, I would do like 5, 6 different tests, varying from fasted, to taking 10 mLs or 20 mLs, to taking just a glucose gel, to taking caffeine, just with lots of different variables, and same protocol every single time. And I am not so much interested then in, how far or how big the point of, or how high the point of exhaustion is. But especially I'm very interested then in that point to see how distributed the fat and carbohydrate burning is. Because obviously over the course, over 5-6 weeks of testing, my FTP will increase also by matter just doing the test. So I cannot take the point of exhaustion as a very accurate number. So more or less, I'm looking into fat and carbohydrates distribution in burning to see where my energy is coming from. And I'm going to test it with 10 mLs, 20 mLs, maybe even 30 mLs.
Well, I mean, overdo it. Go for 60. Like
that's the thing.
Take an entire bottle and just see everything fall apart. See if the wheels fall apart. There was one ketogenic rider. He was not professional, but he also was going to go 5 mLs, 10 mLs, 20 mLs, and he was ketogenic. And he just said, hey, just for the fun of it, I'm going to do 60 mLs, like, too much, because I wanted him to see the data of it getting worse. And he called me up and he said, you will not believe what happened. I never bonked and I blew away my numbers. He had like some crazy great numbers. Like somehow, maybe because he was naturally ketogenic, the body's able to use those ketones, whereas somebody else who's not ketogenic, it tanks them. So like that theory that it would, make his workout worse, he was like, no. So in certain instances, it makes it better. And we don't know if that's because he's fat adapted or his body has more transporters to transport the ketones to where they go. We don't know. So try different amounts, and you might be one of these hyper responders that, these other, only one that I know of, just a hyper responder that can take, many, many bottles. I don't know. What's the point of glucose? Your body has thousands and thousands of calories of energy. So why are you taking this glucose? Yeah, it's better for sprints, but it's also highly inflammatory. Like glucose is just super makes you stiff and inflamed and lactic acid. So ketones create zero lactic acid. I mean, tell me what your race would feel like if you had no lactic acid.
Yeah, I think that maybe because you also mentioned now that glucose is inflammatory. And I think that that was actually the first thing I thought of when my recovery was just enhanced because of taking ketones. Because thanks to taking ketones, I could lower my carbohydrate intake after the training sessions, and therefore put not so much stress on my digestive system, and therefore reduce any inflammatory processes which might have been going on in my body. And as a result of that, recover better.
Yeah. And you might be a candidate, maybe not right away, but after you played around with it and you're seeing whether or not to go ketogenic. So there are very few riders that are just fully ketogenic all the time, like training, but also on race day, but they have no fuel. They're not using ketone ester yet because either they're part of the NPCC or they just, sometimes people think that it's cheating. And I'm like, why? Like if beet juice works, like, why not? So if you transition to ketogenic and taught your body more how to burn on fat, and then you have less inflammation in your workouts and you can work out longer, more hard workouts per week, you get all the cumulative benefits. And then, race day, maybe some people would then bring back in carbs on race day, or they can bring back in the slow carbohydrate in the snake water, just have it, that little bit of a base. Who knows? Maybe that's where the future is going full keto. But, many researchers will say, no, carbs are king and everything is carbs. And like, because what else are you comparing it to? Like protein? You're comparing it to fat? Yeah, carbs is king when you're comparing it to those two. But ketones is just completely different.
You see a shift, I would say, in especially not only cyclists, but mainly cyclists, because it's just, one of the biggest endurance sports there is on this planet. And also because I have contacts with many world-class long-distance triathletes, like proper world-class. And what you see there is none of them are purely ketogenic, because they rely on also carbs to go fast when they need to go fast. But what you see is a shift in diet throughout the day and throughout the training period. So you would see them, having a normal breakfast with what's about 80 to 100 grams of carbs with 30 grams of proteins, if you put it in a box, and therefore have during the training all the carbs, but afterwards, after training, nothing. So it's not fully ketogenic what they're doing, but it's partly keto what they're doing.
It's almost ketogenic still, because what they're doing is they're saying, hey, I'm eating carbs in the morning, but I guarantee you that I'm burning them all off. So you're depleting your glycogen stores, which triggers ketogenesis. It triggers ketosis for the other half of the day. So that's possible. But also look into just using the slow carbohydrate. So, something that doesn't spike, just having that, one brand is called UCAN, just using UCAN. Some teams are playing with that, or they're just using UCAN for like the first half of the race.
Yeah.
And then they use the fast sugar for the last half of the race, and the body's more willing to absorb that fast sugar at the end. So there's just endless different things to try.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's for me, being a rider on a Continental team, obviously money is a big factor. That's why initially, and I still am sticking, to the lower amounts, because I just, being Continental rider, I have to look on my budget. But I'm currently selling a bike to finance my sports journey, you could say. So as soon as I sell my bike, my used bike, I'm definitely gonna get some more KE4s, to start experimenting over the next 3, 4, 5 weeks with higher doses, and also to try to start experiments with higher doses throughout or during a race.
Right.
But until now, I am just lacking of funds in order, to keep repeating it. So that's why I am now trying to get it together for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks to test it on a larger dose.
Well, our hope is that when you use ketone esters, that it's an investment that will pay for itself, because then you'll get more sponsors by winning more races and stuff. But I do have to run here. We had a long talk here. I wonder if anyone's going to listen to all this all the way to the end. But when people are looking for those nuggets of, unique stuff, I think we talked about a whole bunch of unique stuff that, I hope it helps you, and hope it helps everyone else.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. See you.